Hello everyone, it's Shannon here for Waffle Flower Crafts. In today's technique video, I'll be showing you a very simple way to add depth to your alphabet die cuts. It's also, you can use it for your word dies as well. I'm using these Waffle Flower products today. First up is the Trick or Treat stamp set. This is a super cute Halloween stamp set. I'll be using the ghosts and pumpkins from that set. I'll also use the paper cut alpha die set. This is an awesome die set. Comes with all the letters and of course lots of punctuation. Really great die set. And then I'll be using the stitch layers die set as well. I'm going to start off by cutting a panel with the largest die from the stitch layers die set. I cut the panel from 110-pound white cardstock. And now I'm going to start to do some stamping. I'm going to grab a piece of scratch paper here. This is just a big sheet of copy paper and the row of pumpkins from the Trick or Treat stamp set. I'm going to mount it here on my acrylic block and then go ahead and ink it up with some Distress Oxide. This Distress Oxide is fired brick. I'm just going to stamp it once at the bottom of my panel. And then I am going to use the residual ink that is still on the stamp to make a mask, one mask anyways, and then I'll have to ink it up to create a second mask. What I'm doing here is preparing to create a layered background. I'm going to basically repeatedly stamp the row of pumpkins so the whole background or the whole panel is covered with pumpkins. And I do need to create a couple masks just to make sure I'm not overlapping the images. So I just created two masks and I only fussy cut the top of the pumpkins. I don't need to cut off or neatly cut the base at the bottom of the pumpkins. And I grabbed two pieces of painter's tape here and I put one on the right side of the pumpkins and one on the left side of the pumpkins. And that's just going to hold those masks in place when I do my stamping. Now I'm going to have two little ghosts as well in this background, so I do need to create two little ghost masks. So I pulled off a pair of ghosts from the Trick or Treat stamp set and I'm going to stamp them on this full adhesive post-it note. I just find it better to use full adhesive when you use tiny things. It just makes it a little bit easier, but you can get away with just copy paper for a mask when you have bigger images. And the reason why, if you watched my last video, I made masks out of contact paper, and the reason why I did not make masks out of contact paper is because I needed to stamp on top to have a direct match with my pumpkins. I didn't want any like border, so I had to stamp, and you can't stamp on top of contact paper. Your ink won't dry, so I had to do it on top of copy paper, which is also another great alternative to for masks as well. Okay, so now I'm going to start to stamp this background now that I've got my two little ghost masks completed. And I'm put down one of the pumpkin masks right on top of the pumpkins that I've already stamped. But before I get going here, it dawned on me that it was probably a good idea to put a little bit of painter's tape also down onto on the top portion of my panel, just to hold that in place as well so that doesn't slide around underneath the taped mask. So that helped, that just stabilized that panel and helped out quite a bit. So now I'm going to go ahead and start stamping some of this background. I'm going to stamp another row of pumpkins there, and I'm going to go ahead and put my second mask right on top of that. I pretty much follow that process every time. Stamp a row and then pull off one of the lower masks and put it right on top of the row of pumpkins that I just stamped. And you'll see me do that more in just a second. But before I stamp any more pumpkins, I'm going to go straight to stamping one of these little ghosts. I'm going to have two on this panel. I'm going to stamp one on the lower right and then one on the upper left. So I'm inking that little ghost up in VersaFine Onyx Black ink, stamping him down, and because of that mask, he'll appear to be behind that pumpkin. And then I'll heat set this just because that VersaFine does stay, and the Distress Oxides as well, they have a longer window of being wet. So I'm just drying it, and now I won't accidentally smudge, especially that VersaFine. That's the one I'm worried mostly about smudging. So now I'm going to start stamping more and more pumpkins, and you're really gonna see me do the process here. So I'm gonna stamp a row of pumpkins, and then I will peel off one of the masks, usually the lower mask, and place it on top of that row of pumpkins I just stamped, and then I'll ink up those pumpkins again and stamp them as well. And I'm going to continue this process, stamping, then moving the mask, and then stamping and moving the mask till I get to about a quarter away from the top, and I'm going to stop and then do one more ghost, because again I'm going to have another little ghost up there in the upper left corner. So just repeat this process. Pretty simple and not too time consuming, and I did only dry heat set the ink after I stamped that ghost. I went ahead and put the masks right on top of the stamped images of the Distress Oxide. I didn't actually have a lot of smudging there, so I was happy. But I was too afraid to try that with the VersaFine. So every time I stamped a VersaFine, I would go dry it, which I just did there. I just cut it out. And now I'm going to put a little ghost on here. And what these ghost masks do is make sure that the next row of pumpkins that I stamp will appear to be behind the ghost instead of stamping right on top of the image. So real basic masking, just repeated, done several times to create a whole background. And we're almost done here. I think I have one more row of pumpkins to do, and we're finished. Okay, so now the fun part, I get to take off all the masks, including those little ghost guys, and I think masking is always, it's just like embossing. It's always like magical still. I really like it. Okay, and so that panel is done. Now I'm going to move on to some watercoloring. And I just want to remind you, I did not use watercolor paper for this. I am using a 110-pound white cardstock. So I do want to be careful of my water use, not get a lot on here. But I still had a lot of success with this watercoloring on this heavyweight cardstock. I'm using ink to watercolor today. First up was the Distress Ink Spice Marmalade. Then it was Waffle Flowers Oh Happy Day. And then I'm going to use a little bit more of that Fired Brick Distress Oxide. I'm going to use that color to color the tops of the pumpkins, or the stems of the pumpkins. I'm going to spritz my inks with a little bit of water just to get them a little bit more liquidy. And I'm going to use some clear water today, because I'll be using just a regular paintbrush, no water brush today. That way I also have a little bit more control over my water use, just to prevent any warping. But again, if you're concerned about warping or anything, you can definitely just cut this panel from watercolor paper and just use watercolor paper instead. I like to use my cardstock because I like how white it is. I haven't tried the Tim Holtz watercolor paper yet, which I know is very white, and that is on my list of things to try, so I'm excited to give that a try very soon. So I'm just starting to do some very simple watercoloring here. I'm reaching mostly for the Spice Marmalade, putting that down at the lower portion of the pumpkins, and then I will clean my brush, just get a little bit of water and move that color up to the top, and that thins it out, and so it's a little bit lighter at the top of the pumpkins. It creates a gradation. You can really see me doing that here on this pumpkin. I put down that first layer of Spice Marmalade, and now with the clean brush I'm just kind of pulling up, and a little bit of water, pulling up that ink that is on the lower portion of the pumpkin, and that just creates a little bit of a gradation. I also reach every once in a while for the lighter orange, which is the Waffle Flower Oh Happy Day color. I just kind of bring it into the top portion of the pumpkins every once in a while, just to lighten it up and just give the pumpkins a little bit more variety, so they're not all colored exactly the same. Just a little bit more interesting that way. I'm going to continue this process till the whole panel is painted, so I'm going to go play some music for you guys, and I'll meet you back when I'm just about finished. Okay, so I'm just about finished here. I'm going to finish up the stems of the pumpkins with a little bit more of that fired brick Distress Oxide. While I'm doing that, I wanted to make sure that you guys knew that I did stamp those pumpkins with that Distress Oxide, which is a water-soluble ink. Didn't incorporate lots of water, so I didn't lose a lot of linear definition. In fact, I liked how using that ink, I was able to kind of bring in some of that fired brick out from those linear edges, and it just kind of warms everything up, and it definitely adds some richness. But you do want to be careful of your water use if you're using any kind of inks that are water soluble. If I had big drops on those pumpkins, I could have lost some linear definition. So just something to be careful of. So now I'm moving on to the sentiment. I went ahead and die cut all the letters for my sentiment out of white cardstock and black cardstock, and now I'm going to adhere the letters together, but I'm going to adhere the top layer slightly offset, so slightly moving it up to the upper right, and I'm just going to put glue on just a few spots on the bottom letter, because a lot of that bottom letter is going to kind of pop out. So on the left you'll see it, and at the bottom you'll see a little bit of white, and this is basically like creating a shadow, and it adds a nice effect, some nice depth, and it will help these letters to pop from that pumpkin background. So it's a small little simple thing to do, but it will really help those letters to pop and add a lot of character to them. So I went ahead and glued all those letters, and so now I'm ready to assemble my card. I've got my A2 top folding black card base, which I've already stamped and white embossed one of the ghosts and a sentiment from the Trick or Treat stamp set. And I did also cut out of orange craft foam a rectangle panel to adhere right behind my pumpkin panel. So I'm just using some Tombow Mono liquid adhesive to adhere this craft foam down onto the panel. This adhesive is really, really great for craft foam, really strong. I'm just going to hold it there for a little bit to make sure all the corners are flat, and I'm going to now adhere it right onto my card base, but I am going to do it slightly askew, so slightly tilted or offset. So, and just hold those corners again a little bit so they dry flat. Doesn't take very long. And now I'm ready to start to adhere my sentiment. And my sentiment's going to say, "Boo to you." And I'm not going to worry about getting everything perfectly straight. I intentionally like it a little well, not all centered and not perfectly straight. It looks I think it works better for the playfulness of this card. So now I've got the letters kind of where I want them. I'm going to use some more adhesive. This is just a fine nozzle adhesive. I have some matte Mod Podge in there, so if in case I do get a little bit onto that is exposed into the surface, it will dry matte, so you won't see it as opposed to a shiny adhesive. And the matte Mod Podge is also very strong too. I really like it for this purpose, and very reasonably priced as well. So I'm going to continue to glue all these letters down, and you can really see how you can kind of see that little bit of white there, and it adds just some nice depth. It's a really simple step, but it does add a nice depth and some pop to your sentiments. And again, you can do this also with word dies as well. You just cut the word twice out of 2 different colors, and then adhere them slightly offset, and you'll get it'll create that little bit of shadow. So very simple to do, but a nice way to kind of get your sentiments to pop a little bit more. So that's it. It's all done. I'll hold it up here to the camera so you can see. I really like the very colorful front, and then the very simple white on the inside as well. And I don't know if you're any Disney fans here, "Boo to You" is a song that they sing at the Mickey Not So Scary Halloween party. So that's kind of where I got that idea for the sentiment. I hope you guys enjoyed my video. Thanks for spending some time with me today. If you want any more information on the products I use, please visit waffleflower.com, and have a wonderful day.